Before anything else, there's something you need to know. Sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who end up teaching you how to move on without them. Not with arguments or shouting, but with soft smiles, unanswered messages, invitations that never come. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're no longer the woman you used to be. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller. I'm 74 years old. And this is the story of how I stopped being invisible and finally started to feel free. If this story touches your heart, consider subscribing to this channel. Because sometimes all we really need is the reminder that we're not alone. For many years, I truly believed I had done everything right. I raised my only daughter, Rachel, almost entirely on my own while working at the licensing department of the Ashford, Ohio City office. I lost my husband 12 years ago to pancreatic cancer, and I never remarried. Not because I didn't have the chance, but because I genuinely believed there was still so much love to give to my family. When Rachel divorced her husband, taking with her 2 small children and a mortgage she couldn't possibly manage, I just stepped in. I didn't ask for applause. I didn't expect medals. I started cooking meals, picking the kids up from school, helping cover bills that never quite added up. I did what mothers do, what grandmothers do, what women like me have done for generations, quietly, faithfully. My oldest granddaughter, Lauren, was always the light of my life. As a child, she would curl up in my lap and ask me to tell stories about my own childhood. She'd run her tiny fingers through my silver hair and say I looked like a queen. I believed there was something sacred between us, something honest, tender, unbreakable, the kind of bond that not even time or distance could unravel. So when Lauren announced her engagement, I cried tears of joy. Weddings are expensive, of course, and although my retirement income wasn't much, I offered to pay for the videography and photography. I didn't want her to worry about capturing one of the most important days of her life. I signed the contract. With a small studio from the next town over, charged everything to my card and tucked the receipts away gently in the drawer of my china cabinet. She never asked how much it cost. No one did. Maybe that should have been my first warning sign, but I chose not to see it. The rehearsal dinner was held in a beautifully restored barn just outside Ashford, the kind with string lights and rustic charm straight out of Pinterest. The scent of polished wood mixed with the sweetness of wildflowers arranged across the tables, the muffled sound of laughter, glasses clinking, phones snapping selfies from every angle, and me, standing off in a corner, watching it all like a forgotten extra in a movie that once had my name in the credits. That's when my granddaughter walked over with her fiancé, holding her phone, a polite smile on her face. "Grandma Ellie," she said softly, "can we talk for just a sec?" "Of course," I said, but my heart already knew. She led me to a quiet corner near a stack of folding chairs. The videographer and his assistant were testing their angles. I could smell coffee brewing at the buffet table and feel the chill of an uncomfortable truth creeping closer. And then she said it, with that sugary tone people use when their minds are already made up. "It's just the video style we're going for is kind of modern and minimal, you know? So we thought, maybe it'd be better if you weren't in it much, or if possible, not at all. It's just about the vibe. Nothing personal. The vibe." That word sent a cold shiver down my spine. I smiled with my lips, but something in my chest cracked. I looked at her, searching her face for some sign of regret, a flicker of guilt. But all I saw was discomfort with me, and that right there was the moment my world began to shift. "Of course, sweetheart. I understand." That's all I managed to say. The words came out in a choked whisper, and to this day, I still don't know how I managed to smile. One of those smiles that only women of a certain age know how to deliver. The kind trained by decades of holding it together while the heart bleeds silently. She gave me a quick hug, like someone finishing a chore, and walked back to her fiancé without even looking over her shoulder. And I stood there, surrounded by eucalyptus centerpieces and muffled laughter, trying to pinpoint the exact moment. I stopped being part of my own family's story. I pretended to admire the table decorations while my hands trembled. My throat tightened. My stomach felt like it was filled with rocks. This wasn't just about a video. This was about being quietly set aside, politely, gently, like an out-of-place object, invisible. That night, back home, I sat at the kitchen table and spread out the receipts from the videography company like someone trying to piece together a life that had come undone. I read every line of the contract, ran my fingers over the dates, the clauses, as if touching memories frozen in black ink. The house was so quiet that even the faint creak of the wooden floor sounded like a scream. I picked up the landline, the one with the curly cord I've kept for nostalgia's sake, and called the video studio. A man answered, kind voice, steady tone, the kind that comes from years of dealing with weddings, emotions, and last-minute changes. I asked about the cancellation policy. He explained everything calmly. Since the service hadn't been rendered, yet I could cancel and receive most of my money back. I thanked him, hung up, and just sat there, staring at the phone like it could somehow answer the question burning in my chest. What if I just walked away from all of this? The house felt different. The photos on the wall, all those frozen smiles, looked like scenes from a play I no longer belonged to. The picture frames, the crayon drawings stored in my dresser, the armchair where I once rocked Lauren during her colic fits, all of it seemed like remnants of a story that wasn't mine anymore. The next morning, I wrote the cancellation. Email, short, direct, no explanations. I didn't tell Rachel, I didn't tell Lauren. Not even my neighbor, Mrs. Mary, who always brings me gingerbread cookies in a red ribbon jar every Christmas. I just erased myself from something that had already erased me, and still, some part of me hoped I was wrong, but I wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old fridge and the soft clicking of the heater kicking in. The room was dark, but inside me, everything was on fire, a slow burn of humiliation and disbelief. Lauren's voice echoed in my head. It's just the vibe. But it wasn't just the vibe. It was a way of pushing me out without having to say it directly. It was making my presence a problem in a moment that should have brought us together. The next morning, I gathered my nerve and called Rachel. She picked up on the third ring, cheerful but hurried, the tone she always used when she didn't want to get too deep. Hi, Mom. Everything okay? I took a deep breath. Can we talk for a minute about last night? She paused. About what, exactly? About what Lauren asked me, to not be in the video, because I'd ruined the vibe. Silence, then a sigh. Oh, Mom, can we not turn this into a whole thing? It's just the style she wants. It's the aesthetic of her generation, you know? Don't take it personally. I closed my eyes, biting my lip. You didn't stand up for me. She chuckled softly. Mom, it's her wedding. It's not about you. And just like that, again, I was erased. I slowly hung up the phone, as if the weight of that call had transferred into my hands. I sat still for several long minutes, listening only to the tick-tock of the old kitchen clock, the one with the slightly squeaky hands that groan with every turn. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight, like I was wearing a dress 2 sizes too small. I walked into the kitchen, not because I was hungry, but out of pure habit, and caught a glimpse of myself in the shiny side of the toaster. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. A tired face, eyes red from holding back too many tears. Wrinkles that once told stories now looked more like cracks on a forgotten statue. How did I get here? I thought. From someone who once held everything together, 3 generations fueled by fresh coffee, warm hugs, and silent sacrifices, to a woman who ruined the aesthetic. I sat down again, as if I needed to sort through more than just the papers on the table. I needed to sort through my emotions. Yes, there was hurt, But deeper than that, there was shame. A quiet shame. Shame for allowing it to happen. Shame for becoming so disposable in the eyes of those I loved most. And shame for crying, alone, old, in the silence of a kitchen filled with family memories that no longer included me. I washed my face, put on my coat, and stepped outside for a walk. The October wind stung my skin, but I needed the street, the air, something that wasn't tied to memory. I passed the corner store, the bank where I used to pay Rachel's bills, and the school where Lauren and her brother had once studied. Every place was a wound, every memory, a thorn. That night, I pulled out the contract for the video again, read every clause like I was reading a will, hoping for some kind of answer. I called the studio again. Jared, the owner, answered with the same kind tone. Mrs. Eleanor, I completely understand. Weddings can be complicated. Don't worry, you're still within the cancellation window. There'll be a small administrative fee, but the rest will be refunded within 7 business days. I thanked him, and this time, I hung up without hesitation. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was a quiet goodbye, a decision, made with the calm resolve of someone who had spent a lifetime lighting fires in others' hearts, but now needed to warm her own. On Saturday, the wedding day, I put on my best pale blue dress. The one Lauren used to say made me look classy, like the old movie stars. I wore the pearl earrings my late husband gave me for our last anniversary together. I applied soft lipstick and brushed my hair carefully, just like I used to for special occasions. And this was a special occasion. Even if no one else saw it, that way. I arrived on time, greeted a few people, got polite half-smiles in return, took a small sip of sparkling water, and found my seat in the very last row. From there, I could see everything. The ceremony was beautiful. White flowers, emotional smiles, carefully rehearsed vows. Lauren cried. Her groom looked ecstatic. The crowd applauded. Petals flew through the air, and I sat there like a well-dressed ghost, watching every moment unfold. But there were no cameras, no lenses capturing it, and no one seemed to notice. Not yet. I was there, fully present, completely invisible. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, as always, a lifetime of habit calling me to the window. I made my coffee, the familiar smell wrapping around me with the kind of tenderness people had long forgotten how to offer. I looked out through the foggy glass at the backyard, crimson leaves drifting slowly to the ground, the bird feeder empty, the sky still painted in shades of gray. Everything seemed to be moving forward, except my heart. It felt frozen, still, like a part of me had been left behind, sitting on that bench at the ceremony, silently waiting to be seen. But I wouldn't be. It was just before 9 a.m. when the phone rang. The old ringtone sounded louder than usual. Or maybe it was just my soul that had become too tender. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Lauren. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. Hello? Grandma? Her voice was sharp, clipped without softness. What did you do? Well, good morning to you too, sweetheart. Don't play with me. Where are the photographers? Where are the videos? There's not one single professional picture of my wedding. I closed my eyes. The moment had arrived. I canceled the contract, I said, my voice steady, though low. I paid for it, so I thought I had the right to make that decision. There was a heavy, furious silence on the other end. You what? You canceled it? Why? I exhaled slowly. You said I shouldn't be in the video, Lauren, that I ruined the vibe. So I figured if I wasn't meant to be there, then the video didn't need to happen either. The pause that followed stretched endlessly. I could hear her breathing, quick and uneven, like someone on the verge of snapping. Finally, she hissed through clenched teeth. You ruined everything. You said I didn't belong in that moment. I simply agreed, and then she hung up, No goodbye, no words. I sat there holding the phone like it held a verdict. I knew the storm wasn't over, and it didn't take long. That afternoon, Rachel called. "What the hell were you thinking, Mom?" Her tone was ice, distant, as if I were a threat. "I was thinking it made no sense to spend thousands of dollars to be excluded. You did this to punish Lauren, didn't you? Just admit it." I swallowed hard. I did this to honor her wishes. She didn't want me in it, so I wasn't, not in the video and not in the budget. There was silence on the line, and then, like a slap in the face, unbelievable. "After all these years of us taking care of you," that's when I cut her off. "Taking care of me? Rachel, I paid your rent more times than I can count. I raised your children while you rebuilt your career. I paid for braces, school trips, birthday dinners. Let's not rewrite history. I was the one taking care of all of you." The silence that followed was the longest yet. When she finally spoke, her voice had shrunk to a whisper. I need to go." And she hung up. That night, the younger grandkids stopped replying to my texts. Lauren blocked me on Instagram. Rachel didn't respond to my messages. Even Sundays, once filled with photos of homemade cakes, sweet morning greetings, and Bible quotes, were now silent. I became radioactive, a nuisance, a quiet shame no one wanted to name. No longer a grandmother, just a problem. And in that brutal, dense, icy silence, something began to shift inside me. The pain was the same, but the perspective wasn't. The days that followed were heavy. The house didn't just feel empty. It felt bigger, hollower, as if every room echoed with the absence of those who once called this place safe. The silence, which had once brought comfort, now felt like a mirror. And what I saw, reflected, in it was a woman who had given everything, who traded dreams for paid bills, who let her paintbrushes grow old in a closet and her favorite songs go quiet, all to make room for the practicality of a family that never truly said thank you. Not with words that warm, but with gestures, with presence, with thoughtfulness. Looked at my bank account, where automatic transfers left each month like unspoken moral obligations. $650 to Rachel, $85 to Lauren, $200 for Dylan's car insurance. All scheduled with the same routine ease as pouring the morning coffee. But something inside me had shifted. I was starting to see clearly. It wasn't about the money. It was about usefulness. About holding a place in people's lives that only existed as long as I was giving something. That very afternoon, I opened my banking app. Canceling the automatic payments was easier than I'd imagined. One click, then another. Silence. No tears, no second thoughts. And that surprised me. The woman I used to be, the one who trembled at the thought of saying no, who whispered, "It's fine," while bleeding on the inside. She would have been consumed by guilt. She would have lost sleep. She would have worried about Rachel's rent, Lauren's phone bill, Dylan's car. But this new woman emerging inside me? She didn't feel guilt, she felt relief. She felt space. I shut the laptop, got up from the chair, and walked into the guest room. That room where I used to keep toys and blankets for the grandkids was now filled with boxes, stacks of old, things I hadn't touched in years. I rummaged through the closet and found one that made me smile. Just a little, an old oil painting set, the brushes still wrapped in plastic. It had been a gift from Harold, my husband. Years ago, on one of my birthdays, he had surprised me with that box and said, "You're always talking about how much you love the smell of paint, so paint something, Ellie." But I never did. There was always something more urgent. A school, uniform, a work report, a soup on the stove. And after he died, painting felt like an indulgence I no longer had the right to enjoy. But now, I was alone. Truly, entirely alone. And oddly enough, that no longer frightened me. This solitude didn't feel like rejection. It felt like revelation. That night I sat in the living room with the paint box on my lap. The scent of aged oil paints stirred a memory I hadn't thought of in years. Me, 10 years old, sitting in my grandmother's backyard, sketching clouds with crayons. "You've always been a girl who sees the world in colors," she used to say. I had become a woman who spent her life coloring everyone else's stories, but now it was my turn to tell my own, to choose the shades, the brushstrokes, the rhythm. I started with small sketches, the teacup on the windowsill, the empty armchair, the long shadows of dusk stretching through the curtain. And with every stroke of the brush, it felt like another thread of pain was being gently pulled from my chest. I was no longer a grandmother on the sidelines of someone else's story. I was the author, and for the first time, the silence felt like peace. Not emptiness, but presence. The weeks passed like pages slowly turning. For the first time in years, my Sundays began without obligations. No cakes to photograph, no carefully curated quotes to text to the family. The words now belonged only to me, and the silence, far from hurting, wrapped me up like an old friend. I went back to the Ashford Library, the same one where I had spent decades working, cataloging the stories of others. But now it was different. I walked in not as a librarian, but as a visitor, as someone looking to rediscover herself. The reading room still smelled like old paper mixed with citrus floor cleaner. At the front desk, a woman with a bright scarf smiled warmly at me. "Here, for the Wednesday book club?" she asked. I nodded, not entirely sure why. That afternoon, sitting in a circle with other women over 60, all with silver hair, tired eyes, and stories tucked away like letters never sent, I felt something stir. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was something like air filling my lungs after being underwater too long. On Saturdays, I started attending a watercolor workshop at the city's cultural center. That's where I met Benjamin Carter, a 76-year-old gentleman, tall, lean, with a slightly awkward gait, and eyes as warm as fresh bread out of the oven. He wore suspenders and kept pens in his shirt pocket. He was never on time. But he always showed up with something unexpected, a rare autumn leaf, a black and white photo, a poem scribbled on a napkin. "Sorry I'm late," he'd say, smiling with that soft, southern drawl. Time runs different when you walk slow. The first time we really talked was at the end of a class. He wandered over to my easel and studied my painting with gentle focus. This empty space in the painting. Is it a place you're saving for someone? The question caught me off guard, because it was true. I had painted a dining table with chairs around it, one of them empty, bathed in light. It was mine. "Maybe it's what's left of me," I murmured, not thinking too hard. He nodded thoughtfully, then said, with a quiet sweetness that caught in my throat, "Or maybe it's what you're saving. For what's still coming." Benjamin started sitting next to me in the classes after that. We traded tips about blending tones, childhood stories, soft laughter. He told me he used to be a biology teacher and that after his wife passed, he spent years believing his story had already been told. And now, I asked him one day, "Now, I think I'm learning how to live again, one Saturday at a time." Our coffees became routine. After class, we'd stroll over to a little local diner. We always sat by the window, watching the town pass by. Rushed people, young couples, dogs pulling their elderly owners down the sidewalk. It was simple, but it was ours. And in that new space, built with silence, kindness, and no expectations, something inside me began to mend. Benjamin never asked about Rachel or Lauren. He just listened when I felt like sharing. And when I didn't, he simply offered his presence. It wasn't a sweeping romance. It was a slow affection, gentle, like a forgotten teacup on the table. That still warms your hands when you choose to pick it up. Maybe it was love. Or maybe something even rarer, comfort. And for the first time, I let myself smile. without apologizing for it. As the months passed, I began to turn into someone I barely recognized, and I meant that in the best possible way. My days took on a new kind of lightness, not the kind born from emptiness, but from genuine presence. Waking up with no messages demanding help, drinking coffee without rushing, painting, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because my heart asked for it. Reading books without dog-earing pages to send quotes to someone else. It felt like, little by little, I was untying knots that no longer held me together. They only squeezed. One particular Saturday marked a turning point. It was one of those days when the sunlight slips through the window in soft gold, as if even the sun knows your soul needs a little warmth. I was in watercolor class, finishing a new piece, a cozy living room with a bookshelf full of old books, a blue armchair, and a steaming cup of tea on the table. A place that never truly existed, and yet, somehow, it felt like the home I had always dreamed of for myself. Benjamin walked over quietly and stood beside me. "You know what this painting reminds me of?" he asked. "Tell me." "Peace. The kind of peace you only find when you stop chasing approval in the eyes of people who never really saw you." I didn't answer, but something warm filled my chest. And in that moment, I realized I had stopped waiting. Stopped waiting for a response, for hope, for reconciliation, for recognition, and in the space where that waiting used to live. Now, there was room for me. The exhibition of my paintings happened on a spring afternoon. The small community gallery downtown had reserved a room for senior artists. When I arrived, the smell of paint and polished wood brought me back to that first time I dreamed of painting something just for myself. People trickled in slowly, speaking in hushed tones, walking gently, pausing in front of the canvases with curious eyes. One woman stopped in front of a piece, a single chair under the soft glow of a window, and her eyes filled with tears. "It's like I can see my mother there," she whispered, waiting for someone who never came. I smiled. Maybe she finally decided to stop waiting. In the center of the room, I placed my favorite painting, a dining table with one empty chair, the same one Benjamin had seen weeks earlier. But now I had added something. A filled teacup, an open book beside the plate. The empty chair was still there, but it no longer symbolized absence. It represented freedom. Benjamin arrived a little later, wearing a brown blazer with a flower pinned to the lapel. He offered me his arm, and we walked through the gallery in silence. No one asked if we were a couple. No one needed to define us. But between us, there was something stronger than labels. Respect, tenderness, presence. At the end of the night, we sat on a bench in the square across from the gallery. The city breathed quietly, like it too, honored the stories of those who had learned to begin again. "Did you know this was your story?" he asked, gazing up at the stars. "I used to think my story ended the day my granddaughter asked me to stay out of the wedding video. But now I see. That was just the end of the wrong chapter," he smiled, "and the beginning of the right one." And there, on that warm night, with the city lights twinkling in the distance, I finally understood. My place in the world didn't have to be handed to me. It could be created. By me. For me. The days following the art show were quiet. There were no fireworks, no headlines, no dramatic apologies from my daughter or my granddaughter, and strangely enough, I no longer expected any. For the first time in my life, my worth didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Rachel did send a message. "Can we talk?" It was short, cold. I left it unanswered. Not out of revenge, but because I had come to understand something. Not every attempt at contact means remorse. Sometimes it's just a new form of control. Lauren, on the other hand, kept posting pictures of her perfect new family, digital reenactments of happiness, carefully edited snapshots, captions about love and gratitude. But there was no depth, No truth, just angles, poses, performance. And me? I unfollowed her. I made space in my life for something far more valuable than the return of those who turned their backs on me. I made space for myself. These days, my mornings begin with chamomile tea and soft jazz playing in the background. On Wednesdays, I read poetry with women who don't try to compete with each other. On Saturdays, I paint with Benjamin. And on Sundays, I don't send messages, but I receive one or two, genuine, light, from people who truly see me in my living room where framed, frozen smiles once hung. There are now my own paintings, imperfect pieces, made with soul, traces of the woman I was, and monuments to the woman I chose to become. Not long ago, Benjamin took me to dinner at a small restaurant by the lake. The view was lovely. But what moved me most was the way he looked at me, not as a grandmother, not as a burden, not as a shadow of the past, but as a whole woman, present, seen. You have a kind of beauty that only shows up when pain turns into wisdom, he said, gently holding my hand. And for the first time, I believed him. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Lauren will come back someday. Maybe Rachel will reflect on the words she once said. Maybe the grandkids will miss me. Or maybe they won't. And that's okay, because what I have now is enough. I have peace. I have my name back, my voice, my chosen silence, my seat, not off to the side, but right in the center of the room, and a love that came quietly, with no demands and no hurry. If you've made it this far, dear friend, maybe this story has whispered something to your heart too. Maybe you've been erased, silenced, reduced to a role. And if that's the case, hear this gently. You are more, so much more, and it's never too late to become whole again. If this story touched your soul, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It's a small gesture, but it helps us keep sharing stories like this. Stories of real women, strong women, who rise in silence and bloom with dignity. Thank you for being here. Until the next story.